ARY ROSENBAUM here with another fun-filled episode of that 4K podcast. This week's topic, we're going to talk about the small things that can bring down a 401k plan. And first things first, go to that 401ksite.com. Hold plenty of articles. In a few weeks, we should have a date for the National Virtual Conference. And we'll see about the rest of 2025. If not 2025, 2026. I'm sorry. If not 2026, we'll go to 2027. The schedule will come out in August and see where we'll go. Try to do 2 to 3 events a year and whatnot. And go to Amazon.com for Kindle paperback versions of that 401k plan provider handbook, as well as a full circle. So let's get to the topic at hand. As you may or may not be aware, I am a big fan of air disasters, which is called Mayday. It's a Canadian show. It's Mayday in Canada. It's air disasters here in the United States. It's featured on Paramount Plus, Smithsonian Channel, I think, and some other places. And it's I don't know if it's a morbid thing, but I certainly like to. I've always been fascinated about airplane crashes and why things happen and whatnot. Ever since I was a kid, and there was that DC-9 tragedy at O'Hare Airport. But it's a great show. You could see catastrophic events happen. You have U.S. Airways Flight 1549, The Miracle in the Hudson. So not every show ends with such a downer. But there's investigations. You got to go through wreckage, cockpit voice recorders, and maintenance logs to determine what went wrong. And sometimes, it happens that the airplane wasn't correctly positioned for takeoff. Which was the case of that flight that crashed in was a Northwest flight that crashed in 1987 in Detroit, and there was only one survivor from that plane. But there are a lot of silly mistakes that happen that can bring an airline down, and it creates a chain reaction that can lead to disaster, and that can happen the same way with 401k plans. Plan sponsors don't wake up in the morning trying to violate ERISA. That wasn't the plan for the day. They just, happened that they ran the plan poorly. And for a lot of employers, they want to do the right thing. They're like airplanes. Retirement plans are systems that depend on process, discipline, and checklists. And when the small things are forgotten, you're going to have huge problems. And I think there is an importance of the checklist. And like I said, airplane pilots live by checklists. Before takeoff, they're going to review dozens of steps. Fuel levels, flaps, navigation systems, communication equipment. They make sure every single time things are working properly. And when, we've had airline disasters happen as a result of pilots not following the checklists correctly. You always have to make sure everything's in place because human beings forget things. That's a fact. And, forgetting something small like, dealing with flaps and all that stuff, that could, bring an airplane down. And when it comes to, 401k plans, forgetting something small can really cost plan sponsors a whole lot of money, time, and headaches. And, many plan sponsors run their plans without a checklist mindset. They think everything's automatic, and it isn't. They assume that, someone else is responsible for it, like the TPA, the payroll department, the record keeper, whatever it is. And ERISA doesn't really work that way. Responsibility sits with the plan sponsor. They're the ones, the buck stops with them, as Harry Truman would say. And that, that's where the small things start to really matter. And again, I always say the biggest error out there that I see is late employee deferrals. Again, we had this idea, 15th day of the following month, thanks to the advantages in technology, ACH, and all that stuff. Department of Labor reinterpreted and said, no, it's as soon as possible. It's not the 15th day of the following month, which I never understood because I felt like in those situations, the employer could actually make money on the float. It's got to get in as soon as possible. And the problem with being late with deposits once is you don't never do it once. You do it multiple times. And, there'll be situations where the payroll provider isn't working out and not doing it and making sure that the money goes into the 401k plan. It's a process failure. And again, the Department of Labor is going to treat late deferrals as PTs. And that, means corrective filings, lost earning calculations, and sometimes penalties. And that's the problem. Eligibility tracking. That's another mistake. We happen, plain document, might have no service required for eligibility and forget to enroll these people as participants. Same thing with entry dates. They may not realize that, the plan might have a monthly date and they might think it's semi-annual. And too often, HR department assumes payroll is going to be tracking it, and payroll assumes the record keeper is going to track it. So it's like, a fly ball in the outfield. And when nobody calls it, it's going to drop. The employee, I've seen situations when the employees remained outside of the plan for a couple of years and their corrective contributions and whatnot. So this is a problem. And, when auditors or government regulators discover this, the plan sponsor must make corrective contributions called QNECs, qualified non-elective contributions, to make the employees whole. And that's because, one step on the checklist wasn't followed, which was verify, eligibility. Another huge error is plan compensation errors. Assuming your plan document says one thing and administering it in quite the other. This is a problem. And it's a big problem because, we use the definition of compensation to calculate contributions. Bonuses, if they're not excluded, are included. Same thing as overtime. Payroll systems don't always match the definitions of compensation in the plan document perfectly. If payroll codes aren't aligned with the plan document, contributions can be calculated incorrectly for years. I've done that, reviewed a plan, where bonuses, were excluded from comp, even though the plan document required them to be included. The mistake went unnoticed for nearly a decade. No one intended to violate the plan terms. But, nobody checked the checkout list, the checklist that says, it's confirmed payroll. Same thing with, safe harbor notices. Safe harbor plans have certainly been popular over the last 25 years that we've had them. But they come with strings attached. We have that safe harbor notice. The notice requirement seems like very, very simple these days, especially with electronic notices. But, again, this is one of those things where the ball drops because everybody assumes somebody's doing it when they're not. So when no one sends it, the plan sponsor has the problem of a potential compliance issue, and that's not good. And that's a simple checklist item. Loan administration, again, participant loans, they could be certainly a giant headache when they're not done correctly. And quite often they're not done correctly. The idea is a participant borrows money for the plan, going to repay it through payroll deduction. And, what happens, they change payroll status, they go on leave, transfer departments, maybe take out multiple loans, and somehow you have missed loan payments. And that could cause a default, which is going to trigger taxable distribution, which is not a good thing for a plan participant. And a plan participant often doesn't know something's wrong until they're told that the loan has been defaulted. And that's an error that's got to be fixed. Especially, we're not going to fault the plan participant for something that the plan sponsor does. But again, no one wanted the checklist to make sure that the loan was being paid. Another area is the required minimum distributions, the RMDs. You reach a certain age, you got to receive distributions, unless they're still working and the plan allows a delay. RMD rules have certainly been complicated. We've increased the age. We also had a time period where we treated 5% owners, well, we still do, but it was constantly changing. I think in '97 they changed it where the 5%, non 5% owners could delay until retirement, which was a change from TR 86. I'm talking too much history here, so I should stop. But the problem is when RMDs are missed, there's a penalty of 50%. Years ago, I had a one-person plan. I worked for Harvey Berman, and they had bought a TPA in Philadelphia, Mid America, I think it was called. Every plan, it was always funny. Every plan that had more than one employee was underfunded. Every DB plan that had more than one employee was overfunded. So what happened? There was a plan owner. They didn't. We screwed up on the Mid America screwed up on the RMD, and there was a 50% penalty. And I was able to get it waived for the plan sponsor. They gave me a $50 tip, and that was kind of nice. And back then, when I was making like $40,000 a year, $50 was a lot of money. And the best part of it was Harvey tried to bill them, and the plan sponsor's like, you know what, you bought this business, you gotta deal with their mistakes. I'm not paying for it, and so that's what happened. But I did get the $50, which was a big deal for me in those days. And again, RMDs are a big mistake. That's an issue. And then, of course, another screw up were plan document updates, Secure Act, Secure 2.0, plan amendments, plan restatements. When plan sponsors miss amendment restatement deadlines, they need to enter a correction program and fix it. And, of course, fiduciary oversight. That's the most overlooked checklist of all, in my opinion. ERISA has the idea that plan sponsors have to monitor their service providers, their record keepers, advisors, TPAs, and investment managers. That doesn't mean sponsors must micromanage them, but they should periodically review fees, services, and performance. Many sponsors assume that once they hire a provider, their job is done, but regulators see things differently. From a fiduciary perspective, oversight is an ongoing responsibility. Skipping this checklist item is going to lead to litigation or regulatory scrutiny from the DOL and IRS. Small mistakes really compound. Near disasters, there's a chain of events. One small error leads to another, which leads to another. Eventually, the system fails. The same thing happens with retirement plans. A late deferral can lead to an audit question. Eligibility errors can lead to corrective contributions. A misnotice could lead to compliance fixes. Each issue might be manageable on their own, but together they create stress, cost, administrative headaches. I think it's important, to think about airline pilots and maybe to build a retirement plan checklist. Systems work best when humans rely on structured procedures, and there's no bigger structure than that aviation checklist. A retirement plan checklist might be a good idea, and it should include, verifying payroll deposits at each payroll cycle, reviewing employee eligibility quarterly, confirm the compensation definitions annually, that what administration is done correctly versus what the plan document says, deliver required notices before plan year start, monitor participant loan repayments, identify participants that are approaching the RMD age, adopt required plan amendments on time, and conduct fiduciary reviews of service providers. None of these tasks are particularly complicated, but consistency matters. Commercial aviation is remarkably safe today. Back when I was a kid, it just seemed like there was like one or two plane crashes a year. Right now, I think the biggest danger right now is mid-air collisions, as well as collisions at the airport. These are certainly the problems that I see today. Safety didn't happen by accident in the aviation business. It came from decades of learning that human beings, even experts, can make mistakes. Checklists were designed to reduce those mistakes, and aviation safety is higher now than it was 30, 40 years ago, especially 50 years ago. Retirement plans are going to have to operate under that similar reality. Even the most experienced employers and professionals can overlook the smallest of details. The key is not perfection. Um, the key is process. Plan sponsors who have a checklist mindset are going to reduce their risk of operational failures. Because in both aviation and retirement plans, it's rarely the big things that cause disasters. It's really the small things. And the sponsors who remember the smallest of things are the ones that are going to stay on course and have less giant headaches. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of that 4K podcast. Shorter podcast this week, putting a couple in the bank as I go to Denver and travel to Phoenix as well. So sorry for the shorter episode. I think most of you wouldn't mind that. But go to that401ksite.com, got articles, all that stuff. I brought back the section of Beyond the 401k about stupid ideas like what were they thinking in terms of business and entertainment. I think the Live Golf $6 billion is probably worthy of a blog piece. We'll see how that goes. And of course, go to Amazon.com. Books, all 4 books are available, but that 401k plan provider handbook, as well as Full Circle, are available on Kindle and paperback. And tune in next week for another fun-filled episode of that 401k podcast. Take care. Bye.